Today I have a quick little review of Daedalus, The Awakening of Golden Jazz. This is a murder mystery visual novel that is actually part of the Jake Hunter series. I've seen it go by a few different names. It's usually advertised as Alternate Jake Hunter, Daedalus, The Awakening of Golden Jazz, or Prequel Story of Detective Saburo Jinguji, Daedalus, The Awakening of Golden Jazz. The name threw me off for a while because I knew it was related to Jake Hunter, but when I saw that it was Alternate Jake Hunter, I thought, okay, so it's not Jake Hunter himself, maybe it's a different detective just in the same style, or they're just naming it that because it's the same team or something. But then I did some more research and found out that Saburo Jinguji is Jake Hunter. So what we have here is essentially a story about a very young Jake, hence Prequel Story of Detective Saburo Jinguji. If you're curious, because I know I was, in Greek mythology, Daedalus is the name of Icarus's father. According to GreekMythology.com, he was a craftsman and artist who constructed the labyrinth and made Icarus's wings, warning him that they would fall apart if he flew too close to the sun. In the context of this game though, Daedalus is just the name that was given to an enigmatic assassin who was involved in some cases that took place a few years prior. Saburo eventually gets a tip that hunting down Daedalus might lead him to find out the truth about his grandfather's murder. I was really taken aback by how beautiful this game looks. It has a really unique art direction. We have what I assume are photographs of the real world that have been manipulated to look like watercolour paintings. Overlaying that are some animations that give the backdrops a sense of life and make them feel less static. For instance, you can see specks of light floating around the windows and smoke hovering in the air. Thrown into this environment are your typical anime-like character models. I think all these elements work really nicely together, and it's certainly something I don't see very often. Daedalus plays like a typical visual novel/adventure game. Although you do have dialogue options, there aren't any major branches in the story. All the gameplay really is just going through the dialogue and examining different locations and different things within those locations. There is this orchard of the mind mechanic where you'll gather important pieces of information you come across throughout the investigation. At the end of every chapter you go through a little sequence where you'll need to select the right piece of information from the tree to confirm or deny a line of thinking that will ultimately lead you to solve the mystery of that chapter. If you've been paying attention throughout the chapter, this puzzle is usually pretty basic and also pretty short. I felt that at some points throughout the game there was a lot of mandatory moving back and forth between locations which felt excessive and unnecessary to the story. I want to give a little example of this. There's a part in chapter 2 where you're at this man's house, his name is Logan, and you see a photo of him and his wife that was taken at a photo studio with this red chair that Saburo notes he has seen somewhere before. Our goal is to figure out the location of this photo studio so that we can get more information about Logan's history. Back at Grandpa's apartment we see another photo, this one of Saburo and his grandpa, and it obviously has the same red chair and we can gather that it was probably taken at the same studio. But Saburo doesn't make that connection. On top of that, when he looks at the photo, he says, "I forgot where this photo was taken, but it's not far." What's annoying is that right before looking at this photo, I investigated another photo at the apartment, and Saburo noted that Grandpa always wrote addresses on the back of photos. So it's like, all the pieces are there, but Saburo wasn't connecting them. The way you trigger this realization is by going to the bar and looking at the photo wall with pictures of patrons. Oh look, there's that same photo from Logan's house. At this point, he finally makes the connection that the red chair in Logan's photo is exactly the same as the one at Grandpa's place, and that they must have been taken at the same studio. So you go back to Grandpa's house and he finally looks at the back to get the location of the studio. At that point, I was a little bit tired because I'd been waiting for Saburo to get up to speed and the trip to the bar just felt pointless. There are a few instances like this where the movement between locations feels tedious. If you've already made the connection, you're just going through the motions for Saburo's sake, which takes away from the experience a little. I also noticed a few minor continuity issues. There's a moment in chapter 4 where you're at City Hall and you have to move to the dry cleaners and then after that head home. I made the mistake of going straight home and not stopping at the dry cleaners, so the story didn't progress. When I was at the apartment, it was obviously nighttime. After I realised I wasn't in the right place, I went back to the dry cleaners where it was still daytime. So it seems like the game doesn't do a great job of making sure all the locations are consistent with one another and with the story, i.e. the time of day. And that breaks the immersion a little. The story was okay, but not as fleshed out as it could have been. By the end of the game, even though we do uncover most of the mystery, the conclusion felt a little lackluster. I'm trying my best not to spoil any of the story, but I'll just say that there are some things that happened in the past that are very significant and are important for understanding the motivations of the killer behind the current case. What we know about these past events is very vague, and I just think spending more time developing that background would have made the conclusion feel a lot more satisfying. I feel like I did a lot of complaining here, but overall it was a nice game. It's definitely lacking in some areas, which is a shame. Overall, I would probably give it about a 6 out of 10, and that says a lot because I normally struggle to be critical about games. But I think that taking into account the issues with pointless location movement, inconsistencies in continuity when moving between locations, and the weak ending, it feels like the right rating. I think it's really important for a visual novel to be able to maintain an immersive experience and avoid breaking that immersion with these inconsistencies and tedious things that serve to halt the progression of the story, rather than propel it. Even though I wasn't very wowed by the storytelling, I did have a lot of fun playing it. I hope you enjoyed this video and have a lovely day.